In this video, I'm going to talk to you about instrumentation and how to talk about and describe instruments in a piece of music. Now, when talking about instruments, it's helpful to put them into different categories. Now, all instruments make sound by vibration, by vibrations in the air. That's what sound is. So an instrument will create that vibration in the air. But there are 5 different ways of doing that. So these are the 5 different categories. We've got idiophones, membranophones, chordophones, aerophones, and electrophones. So let's have a look at those in more detail. First of all, idiophones. These are instruments that make sound by vibrating the body without using any strings or a membrane, okay? And we'll talk about stringed instruments and membrane instruments in a minute. But as you can see here, we've got a xylophone. So it's the bars of the xylophone that you strike, and those are the things that vibrate to make the sound. The cymbals, the body of the cymbal, as they crash together, it's those that vibrate. And like all of the instruments on here, the maracas as well has little beads inside which hit against the body of the maraca, and that's what vibrates and makes a sound. Okay, so anything that is vibrating and it's the body of the instrument that vibrates, that is an idiophone. Next category is the membranophones. These are instruments that make sound by vibration of a tightly stretched membrane or a skin. So you're talking about any kind of drum really, anything with a skin stretched over it, okay? So you've got some tabla here, a snare drum, the big timpani, and a tambourine with a skin over it. So anything that you hit and it's the skin of the drum, the membrane, that actually vibrates and causes the sound. So that's a membranophone. Next, we've got chordophones. These are instruments that make sound by vibrating one or more tightly stretched strings between 2 points. So any instrument with strings, and it's the strings that are vibrating to create the sound. We've got a harp, a lute, a lyre, cellos and violins, things like that. And we've got pianos. So all of these instruments have strings, and so they are called chordophones. The next category is aerophones. These are instruments that make sound by vibrations produced by air. So either the air produced by blowing through the instrument, okay, the performer will blow through. Here's a flute that you blow through. In fact, in a flute, you blow across the hole of the mouthpiece. The trumpet there, you blow into the mouthpiece itself and blow air through the tube of the trumpet. The saxophone is similar, only you're blowing across a reed, a wooden reed. And then you've got different pipes similar to the flute or recorder. And then you've got another kind which, rather than blowing, it's not you that create the air, it will be some kind of mechanism like the bellows inside an accordion, as you can see there, or an organ. This has a different mechanism to create the air, but all of them, they're blowing air through something to create a vibration. Next, we've got electrophones, and these are any instrument that makes sound electronically. So you're talking about most keyboards, synthesizers. You can see there even DJ decks would be electrophones. Okay? So in the Western classical music tradition, we've got instrumental families. So let's talk about those. We've got the strings, we've got woodwinds, brass, and percussion. And we can also talk about keyboard instruments as a separate category if we want. So first of all, the string family. The main strings come in 4 different sizes. We've got violins. These are the smallest of the string instruments, and the smaller the instrument, typically the higher pitched it will be. So this is the highest pitch of all the string instruments. And then we've got a viola, which, as you can see there, it's still played in a similar way as the violin, but it's a bit bigger, and so it's a deeper pitch. Next up, we've got the cello, which is so big that you can't fit it on your shoulder anymore. It goes on the floor, and you sit down with it between your legs, and you play like that, and it's a lot deeper. And the biggest of these instruments is the double bass, and you have to stand up to play these. They're so big and they're very, very deep. All four of these instruments can be played with a bow, and the bow is made of horsehair, and you move the bow across the strings and that actually vibrates the strings with the bow. That's known as arco, A-R-C-O, or you can also use your fingers and pluck the strings, and this is known as pizzicato. And one more instrument in the string family I want to talk about is the harp. This is lots and lots of strings over this huge wooden frame, and you've got, similar to a piano, you've got pedals on the floor, which you use your foot. Okay, so that's the string family. All of those obviously chordophones. So onto the woodwinds. We'll start with the flute. The flute, as I've said before, it's a metal pipe, and you blow over a hole in the mouthpiece. And just like you would blow over the hole of a glass bottle and create a sound, it's just the same. You blow over the hole and you change the pitch by closing different holes along its length, just like you would with a recorder, and that changes the pitch. A smaller and much higher pitched version of the flute is the piccolo. Okay, it works in the same way, similar fingering, and so you find many flute players can also play the piccolo, and also can play much of the woodwind because the fingering tends to be much the same on all the instruments. So then we move on to reeded woodwind instruments. So the clarinet, this works with a wooden reed, just like you would maybe take a piece of grass and hold it between your thumbs and blow through it. You'll get a kind of squeaky sound. This works in the same way. So you've got a wooden reed, very thin reed that's in the mouthpiece, and you blow across that and it will vibrate and it creates that sound. And a cousin of the clarinet is the bass clarinet, and there it is. Okay, so this is much deeper, a deeper version. Next, we've got double reeded instruments like the oboe. As you can see, it's a tiny little reed, and it's two reeds, one on top of the other, and you blow through between the two of them. And then a deeper version of the oboe is the bassoon, and then deeper still, the contrabassoon. Okay, and these are much kind of more nasal sound than the clarinet. Okay, so that's woodwinds. Then we've got brass instruments. So brass instruments all work by blowing into a length of tube, essentially. And to get different pitches, you simply have to change the length of the tube. Now, back in the day, they wouldn't change the length of the tube. They would have a fixed length. And trumpets, these would be called natural trumpets now. And these would be different lengths, and you'd only be able to play a limited number of notes with those. You can still change the pitch by changing the tightness of your lips around the mouthpiece, but other than that you can't get the full range of chromatic notes. Whereas today we have the trumpet, which is an instrument with 3 valves, and what the valves do, when you push down the key of a valve, it diverts air through different length tubes, so you're able to get different pitches. Another brass instrument is the trombone, and this doesn't have any valves at all. It's quite a difficult instrument to play because to get different pitches you actually move a slider up and down, and that lengthens or shortens the overall length of the tube that you're blowing through. So that's how you get, but you can get kind of nice glissando sounds with that by smoothly moving the slide up or down. Then we've got a French horn. French horns are used in a lot of pieces to signify a noble character, something for a war theme or something like that. They've got a very distinctive sound. And then the largest of these, the tuba, and it's massive, as you can see. Okay, moving on to percussion. All of these you can see here are in an orchestra, typical orchestra. First thing here, we've got a timpani. So timpani is otherwise known as kettle drums, and you'd often get maybe 3 or 4 timpani in a set, and all of them at different pitches, and they have pedals which allow you to quickly stretch or increase the stretch, the tightness of the skin to increase the pitch of the drum. Then we've got a bass drum, which is the biggest of all the drums, and it creates a low sound. Then we've got a snare drum, and the snare drum is unique because it has a metal kind of almost coil spring on the bottom, which creates a rough, rattly sound with it. And then we've got cymbals, which you crash and create kind of dramatic sounds like that. We've got miniature little cymbals called crotales, and these can either be hung on strings and you kind of crash them into each other, very small, and create little bell-like sounds, or you can have them as they are here on a stand and hit them individually like that. Then we've got the tam-tam, which looks kind of like a gong, and then we've got the triangle. As I'm sure you'll be aware, the triangle is fairly simple, but you can get different sounds out of the triangle if you have it in your hand, and you can have an open sound or a closed muted sound. Then we've got the chime bars. The chimes are hit with a metal hammer, and those are very nice. And then we've got the xylophone. I'm sure you'll be familiar with the xylophone. This is quite a large xylophone here, wooden bars. We've got a glockenspiel, which is a little xylophone but with metal bars and creates quite a nice high-pitched twinkly sound. And then we've got another metal xylophone. It's called the vibraphone, and this is a more complex instrument with some moving parts inside that create a very sustained sound. Okay, so that's percussion. Moving on to keyboards. We've got a few different keyboards here. The organ is one of the earliest of all keyboard instruments, and this is an aerophone using air to blow through pipes. As you push down a key, it will move air into different pipes for different pitches. Then we've got a harpsichord used throughout the Baroque era, and this is a chordophone with strings, and little plectrums inside pluck the strings to create that very unique sound. One thing in common that these two have in common is you can't really change the dynamics, change the volume of the sound, because you can't easily control how much air is flowing through the pipes to get a different volume. And in the same way with the harpsichord, you can't control how loud the strings will be when they're plucked. Next instrument, we've got the celeste, and this is usually in the percussion section of an orchestra, and it looks like an upright piano that you'd find at home, but it's not. It's actually a little xylophone which is controlled mechanically with the keys. So just like inside a piano you've got hammers that hit strings, in here you've got metal hammers that hit metal bars like a glockenspiel. And so this is used to create a nice twinkling sound, just like the glockenspiel. And then finally the piano, as we all know, it's hammers hitting strings. And the unique thing, the great advantage of the piano, which overtook the harpsichord in the classical era, was that you could get different dynamics, a wider dynamic range, by striking the keys harder or softer. Okay? So let's have a look at the orchestra. Starting with the orchestra in the Baroque era, as you can see, it's quite small and it's dominated by string instruments, as are all orchestras really, dominated, but by far you'll see strings outnumber any of the other instruments. But here it's all string instruments in this case. You would also sometimes get some brass and a little bit of woodwind as well, but no percussion really. And as you can see, there is no conductor. There isn't a conductor. Instead of the conductor, we've got the harpsichord player in the middle, and they will be directing the group, keeping everyone in time. Moving on, you'll see it's grown. We've got a lot more instruments, more strings, but also at the back there we've got more woodwind and we've got some brass. And right at the back we've got some percussion coming in, some timpani back there. Okay, so it's bigger. And hello to Mr. Conductor, he's just arrived. So no more harpsichord, we've got the conductor leading the group. And as we go into later periods and modern orchestras, they're absolutely massive, especially if you're talking about a kind of film music orchestra. You get loads and loads of instruments, more than even in this picture. So let's have a look at how the typical orchestra would be laid out then. So it would look something like this, and we've got our conductor in the middle, and you'd usually have a group of violins called the first violins on the left hand side at the front, and next to them you'd have another group of violins, the second violin. So each of these two groups would be playing two different parts. And then we've got the violas, then the cellos, and then finally the double basses. So that's the string section, absolutely massive, loads of string players. Behind them, right in the middle, you'd have the woodwind. So a whole range of woodwind there. Behind them, you've got the brass section. Now, you've got to feel really sorry for the woodwind players here, having those trumpets and trombones right behind their ears. Not good, but there's a good reason to have the brass at the back. They are the loudest, even louder than them, though, the percussion. So they are right at the back for obvious reasons, to try and balance the whole orchestra. So you have the loudest things at the back moving through to quieter things at the front. Over on the left, we'd have some harps, one or two harps, and if you've got it, a piano over on the left. So that's it. That's the orchestra. They sometimes have, a little bit of a different layout, but it would generally look something like this. For more information, I would really recommend you have a look at this website, the Philharmonia Orchestra. On here you'll find loads more videos on each of the instruments. You'll get a much better idea of how they work and how to use them. If you're composing for any instrument that you're not familiar with, then it's really important that you learn about the instrument, about how it can be used, because you might end up composing something that's impossible to play on the instrument, and that would be terrible. So make sure you look at this website to get more information. Okay, that's it. Hopefully you've learned lots about different instruments and how you would categorize them. What's really important is that you're able to identify an instrument by hearing it. So this next exercise is going to do just that. So good luck.